Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Extrospective podcast with your host, Zach Villeneuve-Snell. In today's episode, I'm really excited to share that I'm joined by Matt Chenard, who recently went viral on Instagram for posting ice bath videos every single day. Matt is a Christian, he's a lifestyle engineer, a coach, and a business owner. And in this episode, we delve into some societal hot topics, some cultural issues, and offer some really great practical advice. Having been doing ice plunging every day for the last 6 years, Matt and I also touched on the psychological and physiological benefits of this practice, which has seemingly taken the self-development world by storm in recent months. This was a fantastic conversation and one that you'll remember with lots of great insights and takeaways. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Matt Chenard.
I've been doing cold exposure for almost 6 years. Some of my videos I'm cold plunging in minus 40 Celsius. It's just cold. People think they can just opt out and find this utopia of comfort, but in the long run, it's causing so much sickness. And think we can do it on our own and we try to play God. That doesn't usually end up well. Yes, you want to love yourself. Yes, you want to take care of yourself, but it's almost becoming like a worship at the sacrifice of what actually matters. Courage is being able to use everything for what you know is right. What if you win the lottery? Do we think that then we're then going to be happy? Then what? We learn more about ourselves as we try to learn more about others. I help people become successful, but not at the sacrifice of who they are.
Matt Chenard, welcome to the podcast. Where are you
Thanks,
dialing
Zach.
in from today?
Where am I dialing? Alberta, Canada. So the Great White North, I guess.
Fantastic. And I think this is probably the furthest distance away that I've recorded a podcast with someone else. I'm very impressed by the quality so far. I think we must have incredible internets, both of us, to be
Yeah,
connecting.
yeah.
Um, and so the reason why I've brought you on for an episode today is because I came across your channel somehow through the algorithm. And cold plunging, cold water exposure, ice baths, I guess whatever you want to call it, has seemingly taken off in recent years. I'm not sure whether that's just the Instagram algorithm. After all, as I said, it's how I came across your page, and I'm sure many of the listeners would also have done so in the recent few weeks. But with the likes of Wim Hof, Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman claiming all these health benefits, mental and physical, from this crazy and uncomfortable experience, I guess my first couple of questions would be, where did you come across it yourself, and what inspired you to try it? The Extrospective podcast is sponsored by Runner, which is the first of its kind, #1 rated, fully automated running coaching service. Whether you're training for your first marathon, a faster 10K time, or simply couch to 5K, you'll be guided by an expert team, including Olympic marathon runner Steph Davis. Download Runner, spelled RUNNA, today from the App Store and take your running to the next level. With code ZAK, you'll be able to get your first 2 weeks free and see what all the hype is about. That's ZAK, ZAK, for your first 2 weeks free.
Yeah, so I've been in the health and fitness industry for almost my whole life, whether I've been playing sports and training to try to improve in those sports, mainly hockey. And then also, once I finished playing hockey, I got in the health and fitness industry as a coach. I own a brick and mortar gym, a CrossFit facility currently as well. Also, along the way, I just like to experiment. I like to see how different modalities, exercise modalities, can impact someone. And the best way is usually to experiment on yourself before you suggest it to anyone else, right? So one of those would be cold exposure. And I originally started it. So I've been doing almost daily, probably missed a handful of times, cold exposure for almost 6 years. So I had chronic hives. I developed chronic hives in a stressful period of my life, and I couldn't figure out how to get rid of them. And went to physicians, and they said it would probably just be there forever, and that I should take steroids to eliminate the inflammation and bring that down, but it didn't help. So what I did is I started to experiment. I did more of an elimination diet. I stopped working out as much because I think I had some adrenal fatigue maybe. And then also I started doing cold exposure because I would actually, once I got hot, the hives would get worse. And if I made contact, hot and sweaty, like the hot hives would get worse. I made contact with my skin with any kind of barbell, it would get worse as well. So I started doing cold exposure, that mixed with other deposits, as I call it, or habits, I haven't really dealt with hives since. I mean, I get them every once in a while if I'm starting to get sick, but in that matter, I haven't. So that was my first introduction to cold exposure and sauna, and just more of that other side of health and wellness that people don't really venture out into, right? It's mostly, hey, just go work out, try to eat well, but not this holistic idea.
And just purely for the listeners, just in case some people don't know, what actually is hives?
Basically, it's like itchy um, mosquito bites. I don't know. So in Canada, we have lots of mosquitoes, big mosquito bites, essentially all over your body. And they were hot, they were itchy, and very uncomfortable. And I went to the emergency room a couple times too because my chest was feeling tight. I think there was a lot of histamines in my body. I was having a reaction, a systemic reaction to stress. I'm not, again, a physician, but that's what I can attribute to. I just reached my capacity in multiple aspects of life.
It's very interesting to hear that almost the pain point has sprung you into helping that same problem. Maybe not everyone has that same pain point, but it's sprung you directly into helping people with that, which I think is a common theme from a lot of these conversations. Um,
Yeah, I tend to notice that. So any business I do or any thing I promote, I want to have some sort of attachment on a deeper level, deeper than just trying to profit or just trying to create a business itself, right? So my coaching program, the True Alpha coaching program, is actually kind of built off of a struggle my wife went through. She had an eating disorder, exercise addiction. She's trying to find purpose and meaning in something that could give her that. So that's a lot of what my program is built on is finding purpose and meaning and rooting yourself in something bigger than just the outcome you want. So I 100% agree with you, Zach. A lot of times our pain can be purposeful and we might not know what that looks like now, but in the future, there most likely will be something that it impacts.
And I'm glad you come onto that broader point as well, because you describe yourself as a lifestyle engineer, and you refer to this sort of anchor method. Before we dive into this a little bit more in detail later on, maybe could you please take us through how you identify today? So who is Matt Chenard in 2023?
Yes, that's a good question. So in my profile, I'd be a Christ follower. I try to be someone who serves and stewards everything I've been given, and that would be my relationships, money, businesses, my body, my mind, my spirit, to the best of my abilities, pursuing excellence in everything I do without falling prey to becoming consumed and imprisoned by those things I've been entrusted to steward. That's kind of a mouthful, but I like to think of who I am is less about what I do or don't do, and how I impact and how I serve in those things. And that's a lot easier, I think, to pursue than trying to pursue a certain job or a certain amount of money or whatever else. That might be the byproduct, but trying to be someone in these things instead of trying to just attain different things.
And so, I guess to understand then, to provide a bit of context for your new audience and for my audience as well, and my own personal curiosity, if we turn back the pages, then how would you describe yourself as a kid? How would you describe your personality growing up?
It's a good question. I was shy. So for those that haven't met me in person, which there's a lot of you that won't have, I'm 6'6" currently and 220 pounds. So I'm not someone that you would think would be shy or withdrawn. But growing up, I was a good athlete, very good athlete, but I was timid. I was timid. I would be more withdrawn. I really dislike public speaking. I didn't like being in big groups of people. To think of being on a podcast one day would make me nauseous to think about. Like, so if I was in school and I was asked a question, so I was homeschooled for most of my life because I played hockey and it gave us a lot of freedom. But when I was in school, I got asked a question, I'd feel very withdrawn and like I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to share my thoughts. I didn't want to put myself out there to be judged or to fail. And that's kind of the whole story arc of this all is I also started doing cold exposure because I wanted to overcome that fear of pain in the acute sense, but also the chronic sense of exclusion or judgment. So that's when I committed to pair my cold exposure with my daily posts on Instagram. Because what's more intimidating than hopping in an ice plunge, ice tub, and sharing your thoughts with the world, right? And at the time, it wasn't a lot of people, but now it is. Um, and I've kind of shed that part of me where I'm nervous of what people think because I'm more focused on impact than I am of my own selfish need for security and comfort.
Well, that's a very insightful and thoughtful answer. I think that's certainly something that I can relate to as well as being never imagining myself to be speaking on a podcast. I think a lot of us have that moment or that particular, uh, whether it's ice plunging for you, that thing that then breaks us free of that. Then we can kind of cyclically turn around again, as we mentioned at the beginning, use that pain point, but also inspire others to also break free of those things as well. And
Yep.
I think that's quite an incredible thing to be able to do for other people. Were there any people when you were growing up who you looked to as role models or inspirations in this sort of remit or with the ice hockey?
Not so much. So it's funny. I actually didn't watch that much hockey. I played my whole life. My wife likes to watch hockey way more than I do, and I don't know why that is. Um, so I guess, the hockey player I grew up um, looking up to was Al McInnes, just because he had a really hard slap shot. Chris Pronger was another one because he was another big hockey player. But just in general, I really did and do still admire my parents. I think they, I think I know they instill a lot of character traits and values that they didn't even need to tell me, but I could just see it exemplified in who they are. And I think that's a really cool thing to see. I know it's not something that every kid is has the opportunity to be exposed to that. So I'm growing more and more grateful of that each and every day. So I'd say my parents are a large part of, well, the largest part of who I am, but I definitely admire them.
And so, like, just to examine that point of yourself being quiet and observed and thoughtful. Can you think? Have you ever done any kind of introspection regarding like where that trait kind of emanated from? Because obviously you've described that maybe your upbringing was kind of very good, very stable, great role models in your parents. So how come you weren't so comfortable in expressing yourself when you were younger?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm more than happy to dive deep. I think I've always seen something off in the way that we present ourselves, meaning I had a difficult time, and I still have a difficult time with, let's call it egotistical people, overly confident. I've learned to have more grace with it, but I think there's a big difference between someone being cocky, like overly confident and egotistical, and confident and egotistical. And I think I was hesitant of ever putting myself in situations that I could be judged, because that was just something that scared me, but also B, um, I didn't want to be someone I wasn't. And that wasn't to say that that never happened, but being an observant person and a withdrawn person, I like to observe people. I like to observe people. I like to observe nature. I like to observe these principles, these underlying principles that not a lot of people now I see really think about, and the connection points between them. And I could see that a lot of people, they present, they were loud, they wanted to be the first ones to talk because they were insecure and wanted to put this facade or this mask on. And I was more so afraid of people seeing that in me. So I avoided that myself. And as I've grown and matured, and I have a lot more maturing to do, um, I've always wanted to make sure that I don't present myself as something I'm not, because, as an example, if I were to have grown my following on Instagram based on someone I wasn't, that's I think that's a path to losing yourself really quickly. And you can see it with many influencers, many people who have influence, or role models or actors or stars, whatever else might be. They start to become what they do instead of knowing who they are outside of that. So if you lose that, then who are you? So to answer your question, I think I've just always been observant in that and withdrawn to, and not understanding that not everyone thinks like that. So yeah, that's a kind of roundabout way of answering it, Zach.
No, and I think there's a couple of things I'd like to pick up on there. The first of which is that if you are your quote unquote authentic self, if you do reveal yourself in only ways that you know to be true to yourself, then you have that kind of reassurance that if you do get rejected, yeah, it's quite sad because then you're getting rejected on the basis of you and not a facade. But also, then the people that do stick around and the people that do come into your life do so because they've found a meaningful connection or really like you for yourself. Whereas I suppose if you're going around trying to be liked by others, you always have that doubt in your mind of, am I just being liked because of this facade that you deep down know not to be true? So I think it's living, and it's not easy, but it's consciously trying to live in alignment with the truth and what we when we look ourselves in the mirror at home with no one around. You know, am I living up to who I say I am and what I stand for? I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, another thing as well, I remember talking with a friend about this quite a while ago. Came up with this. It's probably been said before. It's one of those cliquey self development kind of quotes, but confidence is knowing, not showing. And I
Right.
think that certainly speaks into what you were mentioning there about yourself observing and sort of knowing at a deep level and seeing these other people projecting their insecurities.
Mhm.
Why do you think that's served you? Because, of course, in some environments that can be a negative because, for better or for worse, the leaders tend to be the people who speak up the most, not necessarily the most competent. Um, but where do you think that quiet, observant Matt has really served you in any capacity? You know, your personal life, career.
Yeah. I also do a lot of personality tests with those I have the privilege of coaching, or in businesses that I'm part of, or investments, because I've noticed we've all been designed a different way, right? We're all gifted and have these different geniuses, but we also have these different frustrations or things that would not be in our wheelhouse or our gifting. And I think some of my giftings would be more of that wondering, observant, what is possible, what's underneath the surface, what's that you mentioned before we started this podcast, is what's that golden thread attaching everything, right? What are these principles? What are these commonalities between fitness, between a relationship, between a marriage, between a corporate entity, between someone in a sport, mindset, all these different things. And then once you can find these commonalities, are these underlying themes, you can start to help people to, to find them and identify themselves so that they can then apply them in their own life. So to answer your question, I think that's how that has served me, right? I've been observant, I've been quote unquote withdrawn to observe how people interact with each other and how the world kind of works. I'm a big fan, like in the Bible, of Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Job, because there's a lot of wisdom in those books, and it helps articulate and helps you make sense of this world that doesn't really make sense, right? And that's what I think I've been more designed for, is helping make sense of those things and apply it and make it applicable to people in a one-on-one setting or a small group setting, so that they can better invest into all these different areas of life, so that they can also steward everything they've been given to then create positive impact and leave a lasting legacy that others can eventually follow.
One of the things that I've recognized in my own life is that when I identify a trait or a behavior, good or bad, in another person, it's only because I've first identified it in myself. Whether that's an insecurity that I had, and then I see someone else projecting that insecurity, and that's the reason why I can clock it. Do you think there was that for you as well, where you did do that kind of internal observation? You were able to kind of, I don't know how you describe it, but kind of be the bird's eye view of your own life and personality, and then that's then what's equipped you to help others. Would you say that that's true?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I've gotten better at it over time, and I don't think it's one of those things where you don't really know how other people think, right? You don't really know what other people think about consistently. So the greatest example of this is my wife and I. So she is a very concrete, tenacious, ambitious, um, linear type of thinker, right? Gets stuff done. She's very good at whatever she does, excellent at whatever she does, and doesn't like to make things more complicated than they need to be. Where I am more, I like to talk things through. I like to think, where's the possibility? Where could we go in the future? Why is this the way it is now? How do we interact and why we're interacting this way? So when you're saying that, I think I've been able to look best at myself when I interact with other people, because if you are curious and trying to understand other people around you, you realize that we're different, right? We're all different in how we see the world, whether that's because of things we've gone through or whether that's how we've been designed, or um, that's a nurture creation type thing. Is then you can start looking at yourself in the reflection of someone else and say, oh, I see the world this way, or I might think this way, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. And I think we learn more about ourselves as we try to learn more about others as well and be more curious of them.
I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from this podcast. I mean, I've only been doing it now for 4 or 5 months, but speaking with lots of different individuals with different life paths has really opened me up and exposed me to the great um, latitude of experience that people can grow up in different environments, socioeconomically, different cultures, different family orientations, and I think it's having an appreciation for that is invaluable. I think because we're egocentric by nature. We tend to look inward and think that everyone thinks like us by
Mhm.
default. And so, like you say, by being able to examine others and then kind of see that reflection, it's almost going, yeah, I can notice that you share my view because of that reason, but then actually, I understand why we aren't seeing eye to eye on this, and it's not necessarily that I'm right and you're wrong. Of
Right.
course, there is an objective right and wrong outside
Yeah.
of that, but I think definitely having an appreciation from that for that is a better approach to then go into any kind of, I don't know, politics or business negotiations or just friendships and understanding all those difficulties you can have at work. I think having a bit more grace because of that fact is such an important thing to mature into, and it's definitely something I'm continuing to learn day by day. But I think the listeners could probably really benefit from trying to lean into that a little bit more, as you've alluded to in your own life. And I definitely share this fascination of psychology if it isn't obvious already. That's the basis of this podcast, and it's super interesting to me that we have this sort of fetishization for like pushing the boundaries to the extremes.
Mhm.
Um, I've written down here whether it's waking up early like Jocko Willink, ice baths like Wim Hof, or ultra marathons like David Goggins. We have this weird desire to just keep pushing further and further. I've seen yourself wake up very early for Bible study. You obviously train like an athlete, and yes, the obvious cold plunging, which is probably why many people would have come across you. So not only for the reason of the skin irritation and the pain point that led you to do it, but why do you think your kind of personality type draws you towards ice baths? And like, is there a specific trait? I know you mentioned earlier that it's like that you're sort of like breaking free and going into your comfort zone of like talking and being in an uncomfortable environment. But Could you maybe talk about that a little bit more? Because I think that's an interesting point to dwell on.
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. I appreciate these questions. I think it's that so I'm competitive too. I mentioned my wife is, but I would be competitive in a different way. And I don't like the idea of something having power over me, meaning something that I'm fearful of. So believe it or not, and I don't know, because I've been doing this for a long time and my reaction is pretty calm when I get in the cold plunge tub. I still feel nervous every single time, right? It's not that I'm absent of that fear of that pain. I've just learned how to deal with it. And I've always thought that and observed again that we're going to go through a lot of pain in our life. We're going to go through a lot of chaos. There's a lot of uncontrollables, whether that's grief, whether that's physical pain, whatever else. And I kind of took this mindset that I would rather suffer the momentary discipline and these discomforts. And when I say discomfort, I want people to know that I'm not just talking about cold plunge. I'm talking about anything that makes you uncomfortable, anything that you have resistance to in the terms of waking up early so you can do your devotions, putting down your cell phone, that's the comfortable thing, and trying to create intentional time with your family, eating healthier than just always reaching for the snacks. And this isn't to say that I'm perfect at that. I definitely enjoy chocolate covered almonds and snacks quite often.
Yeah.
But I think it's this idea going back to start of not wanting to be controlled by something, not wanting to look back at my life and say, I wasted a lot. Because as I grow older and as I read more and as I observe other people, time flies. Like it kind of sounds cliche, but it's so short. And if I just become complacent and I become stagnant in what I'm doing, I'm wasting the most precious gift I have. And the one thing that not the one thing, but the thing that I don't know how much more I have, right? Once I spend it, it's gone. Once this time is done, it's done. So I want to try my very best to spend it as much as I can and rid myself of all these fears and these limitations. And I think that's the real big thing is that um, driven people, successful people, they just continue to push down the walls, right? They're never at this point where they said, I've crossed the finish line, I'm done, I'm good. Because I don't think that should be a thing. I don't think retirement should be a thing. I don't if you look at these places in the world where they live to be into their hundreds and still healthy and fit, they still have purpose. I think as soon as we lose that purpose, as soon as we lose that pushing against the resistance, that wall, and we stop growing, that's when we start to lose our life. And that doesn't mean our physical life. We lose the capability to live the hours we've been given, and that's scary to me.
It's fascinating to, again, sort of observe yourself from a bird's eye view when you know that you're succumbing to those more sort of like primitive, short term, impulsive desires. Like reaching for the most high sugar content thing at the supermarket, or scrolling social media for hours on end, which I'm sure many people can relate to. And it's an ongoing thing with myself trying to make that environment as conducive to not doing that as possible.
Right.
And I suppose with yourself, do you do ice plunging first thing in the morning? Is it first thing or
Yes. I do my whole morning routine first, and then right around usually 9 o'clock, depending on calls, I'll do cold plunge. But if I have calls in the morning, I'll do it before. So between 7 a.m. and 10.
right? Okay, so I guess it definitely speaks to that getting I suppose you would call it the daily deposits, but putting that voluntary momentary discomfort um, at the beginning of the day. So you sort of like front load the things that you don't want to do because then that sets you up for a rest of the day that you feel like, bang, I've ticked this off, I'm ready to go, and that's completely aside from the tangible like physiological benefits of ice
Right.
plunging, which do exist, and I'm sure we'll talk about them later on. But purely from a challenge overcome perspective, you've nailed those things, those non-negotiables, I suppose you'd call them, and
Mhm.
then that kind of propels you onto the rest of your day. So when you first started taking up the ice plunging and the daily devotional, as you mentioned, like what was the biggest difference that you noticed in the rest of your life? Because it's not just in those things that we find the benefit, but almost the there is tangible benefit to it, but it's almost the other things that also then get elevated and you have that appreciation for what you should be doing. So can you
Yeah.
remember back to like I'm sure it wasn't like literally night and day, but that kind of process was as you changed yourself.
Yeah, this is such an interesting thing to talk about because I think we tend to gravitate towards things that give us the instant gratification, the instant feedback. So Julissa will listen to this, my wife, and she'll probably laugh because when I'm stressed, I'll have a couple pieces of candy because it's that comfort, that instant gratification. And I think a lot of the important things in life, the things that actually create long lasting results and fulfillment, require that delayed gratification. So when I say cold, when I do cold exposure, yes, I feel that instant dopamine rush, that 250% increase in dopamine, and I feel good. I feel clear. But there's a lot of benefits, lagging benefits that is hard to attach to that. I know they're there. And the same thing when I do my devotions and prayer. I know the benefits are there. I know it helps me have more peace and calmness and be more present. But in the moment, it's hard to say, yeah, that gave me that. So when, let's say, for example, I say I eat a piece of candy, I get that instant rush, right? Like it tastes so good and it satiates that, I guess that I get that dopamine jacked up a bit, right? And same thing with exercise. So I think my wife had the exercise addiction. You get that pretty instant feedback, right? It's a lot harder to become addicted to that because there's a lot more resistance to it. And same thing with cold plunging. It's hard to become addicted to it because there's a resistance. It's not comfortable. Whereas sugar, drugs, all these other things, alcohol, there's not a lot of resistance to that dopamine, right? And so we're talking about benefits of things. I think the benefits I get from cold exposure, my daily devotions, my routine, they're more delayed, but I think they help me create distance from those other habits that are not as advantageous to my overall lifestyle.
I suppose that as well speaks to the importance of the discipline of doing it even when you don't want to, because there is that resistance, because there is that time lag between, for example, going to the gym every day. Of
Mhm.
course, you have these, the newbie gains of starting lifting weights, and you realize quite quickly. But I suppose it's an example of you have to do something difficult that you might not want to do every day for 6 months to then see the result. Whereas you can open your phone and watch YouTube videos of people, 10-second clips, memes, which, in moderation, it has its time and place. But you can do
Right.
that and constantly feel the instantaneous benefit of doing that. But then in 6 months' time, you're still in the same place looking at the same memes. And then that's you start to question, what have I been doing for the last 6 months? Compared
Mhm.
with, okay, now I'm starting to feel fitter and better. And I suppose for some people, as a vanity metric, they start to gain size and physicality. So it's a really interesting debate, and it's definitely something which I see people rebelling to now as well. And I guess people rebel in the form of something like a cold plunge because it's kind of going so far in the other direction for a lot of people. It would certainly be something that I would do. Um, but it wasn't for you, you would say. It wasn't like a rebellion against the comfort.
I guess you could look at it like that. If we're talking about comfort, I think Michael Easter, there's a book called The Comfort Crisis. I definitely recommend people read it. It's really, really good. But yeah, you start to look at people almost rebelling against personal responsibility of taking good care of their health and fitness in all aspects of life: mental, physical, relational, professional, and spiritual. Because if you look at it, what is being advertised to us? It's these instant fixes, these acute programs that promise us gain this much money in this amount of time, lose this much weight in this amount of time, um, have a happier relationship this amount of time, all these different things. Now, I know there's ways to market so that you can get people into your program to help them, but a lot of people get lost in that thinking that they don't need to take responsibility of doing the boring daily things to push against that comfort, to go the out, to rebel against that comfort, and to do the mundane things that help you grow as a person so that you don't go towards sickness in all the aspects of life. Because we are either moving towards sickness or fitness, right? And taking action. So even taking inaction is taking action in direction. So if you don't take action on working on your health, if you don't go to the gym, if you don't eat well, if you don't create those deposits in your relationship with your spouse, that's still moving you in the direction, right? The world doesn't stand still just because we want it to. We can't bypass these important parts of life. We have to participate. And I think what's happening is people think they can just opt out and try to find this utopia of comfort and pleasure. But in the long run, it's causing so much sickness. And we are, I don't want to sound like fear mongering, but we are just at the tip of what this is going to look like because people are getting so sick physically, mentally, spiritually, and it's going to be absolute tidal wave. And we're not going to be able to create anything to bypass these chronic issues that we ourselves have created because we couldn't have the discipline to take care of the things before they became urgent. What is now urgent in our life was once important. What is now important will be urgent if we don't take care of it now.
There's so much there that you've given me to sort of unpack on and choose to go with. I suppose that the point regarding the fact that inaction is an action. I think there's something Jordan Peterson repeats multiple times in his work, which is regarding the fact that we don't contemplate and we don't calculate the consequences of being in the same place in a year's time. We see it as inaction, but actually it is a choice. And as you say, moving the needle between sickness and health, not just literally in terms of our physiology, but also, as you've mentioned, spiritually, emotionally, I suppose even financially, right?
Mhm.
There are those same comparisons you can draw across. Even even like there's an example of like the financial the way you can put it is compound interest. You know,
Yeah.
you're either gradually accumulating or there's inflation and you're gradually staying the same, but inflation is eroding that same value. And I think that can most certainly be applied across. Um,
Mhm.
what was the I've just lost it. What was the final point you were making there? Because it's something that I really wanted to hone in on. I don't know if you can remember.
I'll try to remember, but I just wrote something down here as you're talking too in the financial sense is talking about principles and that thread tying everything together. People are trying to win the lottery, right? They want to win the lottery financially, physically, relationally, professionally. But when you're trying to win the lottery, you're then saying that this is what's going to break me free and what's going to make me happy. So what if you win the lottery? Do we think that then if we can take a lot of trips, if we can do all these things to buy all these things, that we're then going to be happy? Then what? It's about service. It's about people. It's about stewardship. And when we try to bypass the work that goes into these things and to think that that financial gain or the physical gain or whatever else might be is what the meaning stems from, that's when we really get lost. And that's where we really lose our place in our own journey. And you look up one day and say, "Oh no, I don't know where I am."
Don't they say that a lot of people that win the lottery end up becoming broke because the fact that they couldn't steward and manage their own modest income, it doesn't just sudden you don't suddenly become financially what would the word intelligent to suddenly be
Right.
able to manage this greater income.
Yeah.
And I suppose as well, from a psychological perspective, you can draw parallels with like the term gold medal depression. Like if you have this thing that if I only achieve this, and of course, achieving a gold medal is pretty impressive. I'm not taking away from that, but then what? There's no
Yeah.
there's no daily there's no daily responsibility. There's no daily sort of working on yourself, serving others, being something of value to other people. There's no purpose beyond that, and that is what is causing a lot of people to potentially then question, why am I even doing this for? Is Would you say this is a theme in? And I know potentially you're coaching. I don't know exactly what it involves. Is it health and fitness, and also then this element of kind of psychological?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not like a psychologist or counselor. I'm a lifestyle engineer, life coach. Have certificates in leadership and mindset and coaching. Um, but what I've seen is there's, again, parallels between all these different platforms or modalities of life. If if you understand how to be consistent and anchor yourself in something bigger than the results you want, you can get results in the things that you try. Great, because it's not that we need a perfect program to get the results we want. We have to become the consistent person to take action on an imperfect program or a perfect program. Right? It's better if it is a really good program and you're a consistent action taker. Um, but you'll get better results in an imperfect program being consistent with that than you will with a perfect program and not being consistent with that. So what I really focus on is helping people become the consistent, resilient, and disciplined leaders, both professionally and personally, so that they can then have thriving marriages, have good relationships with their kids, be a good leader, be a good employee, um, financial gain if that's what is of benefit to them, but not to become imprisoned to that to impact. So it's really working on the person and then expanding everything else around them out as a byproduct instead of pursuing everything else on the outside. And then that squashes the person in the middle, right? And I think that's what happens is we're pursuing the byproducts that we see successful saying, or what we see as success, meaning money, fame, influence. And the more we pursue that at the sacrifice of who we are, the more we crush ourselves in the process instead of working on ourselves and saying, how do I become a better leader? How do I grow? How do I better steward all these things? And then the byproduct will be the byproduct. But I'm not dependent on more money for happiness and joy.
That's a fantastic insight, and obviously something that you've picked up. You've been able to look at each individual story and sort of aggregate it across everyone, and then that's how you've deduced these universal truths, I suppose. Would you say
Mm.
that those things, that thing, is the most common kind of pain point, the most common thing that you help people with in your work is just that they are focusing on something external rather than getting the groundwork? Do you think
Yeah.
that's the most common thing?
Yeah. So I often ask people why they want what they want. So if they want more money, if they want a promotion, if they want the six pack, if they want the happier marriage, why do you want that? Right? If it's something that is selfish, if it's something that is doesn't impact people or isn't going to add value to the world around you or make you a better person for the world around you, I mean, we see it time and time again, and it can't just be happenstance that you'll feel empty when you reach it because you put all the pressure on that thing to give you this fulfillment and meaning. And that is the common thread is how do we find meaning and purpose in our day-to-day life? How do we become more present? How do we make time and create time for what really matters in the end? And then also to be able to be successful in what you do and to pursue excellence at the same time, but not the sacrifice of who you are. So if I could really condense it down is I like to help people. I help people become successful in what they do, but not at the sacrifice of who they are. So if they need to let go of this thing so that they don't sacrifice the other important things in their life, that's what I want to help them do so they can have that meaning and fulfillment.
I love that. I think a lot of people could take a lot away from what you've just shared, and that's certainly something I'm gonna be clipping
Oh,
as a
thanks.
and sharing onto the socials after this. Tying on from that, what would make sense flowing from that is to talk about the way that you prioritize your own life. When I reach out to guests for this podcast, for those who aren't familiar, basically just ask a few kind of general questions, and you put faith, family, professional, business in that order. I suppose a lot of people these days would order it differently. People put themselves first, but themselves in sort of like a very worldly sense and kind of self love. How has your faith, because I know you put faith as like the bedrock, how has that come into your identity and shaped and influenced the way that you show up for your clients and for yourself in general?
Yeah, that's a yeah, this is a good question. I see a shift happening in the world that this soul self-love um thing, yes, you want to love yourself. Yes, you want to take care of yourself, but it's almost becoming like a worship at the sacrifice of what actually matters. Meaning, so we talked about my faith is the most important thing. I said I'm a Christ follower, so Christ came back and turned everything upside down of what people thought was important. He served. He was meek. He he didn't do what the world thought he should do, and that had him hated by a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of stuff happening in the world now where it's a lot of about the me centered things. So even if we tie this idea, this principle into marriage, there's a lot of things out there that say if you're not happy, if they're not serving you, then be done with it. But that can be so damaging because what happens then when the initial part of the romance wears off, the butterflies? So then are you then saying that that is no longer important, that you have freedom to just exit that relationship, that covenant, when in reality true meaning and fulfillment and happiness in a marriage comes when both people commit to loving each other unconditionally? And this doesn't mean in a transactional sense, meaning I will love my wife once I feel that she loves me. And I don't say this as a way of me positioning myself as I do that all the time. I struggle all the time. And I think we all do, right? Because we are very me focused and we want to provide for ourselves. We want to take care of ourselves and keep ourselves safe. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that. But what everyone's seeking is not found in more for you. It's not found in more leisure time all the time, but that still can be beneficial and important to make you more for other people around you. So in terms of this, my faith is the most important thing I'm choosing to do, right? I'm choosing to do it every single morning. I'm choosing to try to look at the world in that way. I'm choosing to try to walk in the same way that Christ did to the best of my abilities. And I'm going to fail. But as I fail, as I continue to pursue that each and every day, I'm sure I'll be refined and more in likeness of that than I was the day prior.
And I suppose our culture is in the same way as it kind of gratifies this instant validation, this instant cheap dopamine. Everything is self-serving, and I really like the way you use the word transaction as well, because I feel as if you put yourself first, you're always going to just look for other people to serve you, and if a certain situation or if a certain role isn't serving you, then you leave. But I
Right.
think what Christ demonstrated through his life, and I guess generally what the Bible teaches us, is that we should be postured towards serving other people, and that is where the greatest fulfillments come from. I mean,
Mhm.
that the Bible says that, and people have come to that same conclusion in their own lives these days. And I think it's frustrating to see that kind of that conversation in a space which is secular, and a lot of people, because there is no grounding in the Bible, will dispense with it because they'll be like, well, this is just a irrelevant nonsense written however many years ago, and I'm just going to
Right.
live for me and pursue me and do all of that stuff. But I mean, I would then go, well, look at the rates of depression, look at the rates of unfulfillment, and all of these people People that are, I think, over 50% of women at 30 are now unmarried, and fair enough if it's a choice, but I think it's leaving a lot of people in general pretty hurt and upset. And is that something that you would also share? And do you have any thoughts on that kind of whole storm as well?
Yes, 100%. And if you just look at, well, you look in the Bible, you look at history, I mean, these rhythms, these cycles happen over and over and over again where we think we can do it on our own and we try to play God, but that doesn't usually end up well, right? It doesn't. Trying to find fulfillment and meaning and purpose in these things, right? So I have a picture behind me. I don't know if you aren't watching, it's a mountain scenery. My wife and I went there. It was in Italy, the Dolomites, this beautiful lake. And it's beautiful, it's breathtaking. And I'm super appreciative for that time. But I shouldn't worship that, right? I should look to what created that, who created that, right? And worship that. Because as soon as we start to create idols out of these things that are material, um, we're again setting ourselves up for unfulfillment and lacking purpose because you talk to anyone you keep who's achieved any kind of success, there's always that next step. What's this arbitrary next thing? What's this next adventure that I'm going to get my fill of this thing that is just a tasting of what true fulfillment and spiritual fulfillment is found in Christ, right? And it's a simply I'm trying to think of the word. It's pointing to something else, right? And we stop and we start to look at ourselves and say, how can I fulfill me? How can I fulfill me? How can I satiate these needs and these wants? Not how can I serve others? Not how can I sacrifice myself for others? That's where the meaning and the fulfillment is serving. And you see people who start to understand that they're the ones that are joyful and resilient in the chaos.
And I also suppose that, and I don't want to go too much into this whole tangent of discussion. I'm sure we could talk for hours about this sort of thing, but I suppose that also leaves an individual who is serving open to being taken advantage of, because if they are giving, and I don't just mean in the sense of relationship, but in any capacity in life, I'm sure you could apply this same sort of philosophy. Is if you're a serving, giving person, and you are trying to live that life as you've sort of articulated quite well there, then that does open you up to be exploited, because people will be self-serving. They'll see that you're giving, and they'll be like, yeah, take, 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 and then see you later. And so I know this might not be like specifically a question related to kind of the broader discussion here, but if and it would be very much relating to someone who would be more agreeable in their temperament, right? So they're compassionate and polite, but they don't often put themselves first. How would you set about helping someone like that, because they acknowledge that they want to be having that purpose above them. They acknowledge they want to serve, but they're getting taken advantage of. So
Mm.
how would you try and go into that situation and equip someone like that? Because I, even from my own personal perspective, I've recognized times when I've been both, but I've definitely been taken advantage of in at times. And so, how would you how would you prescribe someone like that?
Yeah, I guess that kind of defining what servant hearted and serving others means. It doesn't mean that you have to put yourself in vulnerable situations where people can take advantage of you either. Um, you still have to stay true to your values and your principles. And it's not wrong to want to take care of yourself either, right? And not also saying that you shouldn't take care of yourself and let's say give all your money away, but if you feel called to do that, then do it. But I'm not saying that that's necessarily the thing either, or to say that you shouldn't take care of your body and work out consistently because that would be selfish. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you have to, yeah, this is a tough question because I think it's really individual based. Is because meekness is not weakness, right? So we often think as servant, being servant hearted and giving could look weak, but meekness is still a controlled power. Like you should be strong, you should be courageous, but in controlled matter and not ever have to use that. Um, but so that means that you walk quietly with a heavy sword or something. I think that's a saying, meaning you have the ability to stand up for yourself. You have the ability to stand up for what you believe in. Um, but that doesn't mean necessarily in terms of fighting people or getting aggressive. It means that you're willing to sacrifice all these worldly, earthly things to stand up for what you believe is right and what you believe that truth is. And I think that is true courage. It's not, courage isn't necessarily being aggressive and being resentful and hating on people. Courage is being able to lose everything for what you know is right.
That's a fantastic response to that question. I kind of want to take things a little bit back towards your own personal life, recent
Sure.
events, the Instagram. I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to hear what it's been like in the last 2 or 3 months. So we've described earlier in the podcast that you've been posting online consistently, ice plunging, talking to the camera, doing things that were uncomfortable for yourself. And I suppose before we even delve into that, that speaks to the consistency and the hard work, regardless of results, right? The discipline to
Right.
show up. Because I'm sure many people will start something, get discouraged because they don't see results, especially in a world of instant gratification, seeing your biggest follower, seeing the people that you follow online with all these followers and likes and comments and
Yeah.
the money that's coming in, whatever that looks like, and to be discouraged. And so when I first reached out to you, it was one of those things that I recognized that your account has pretty much blown up in
Yeah.
recent couple months. So could you take us through like what kind of a following you've kind of grown from that? Were you surprised, and how did it all come about from your perspective?
Yeah. So I remember committing to posting every single day 3 years ago, and my account was at 300 people, 330 people. And that was a way of me getting over that fear of judgment and saying, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to commit to posting every single day. Um, and with time, I know I'll get better at writing. I'll get better at storytelling. I'll get better at caring less what people think and just kind of put that work out there. So then fast forward to, I think it was December, the first week in December. It's been like 5 or 6 weeks. I was at, in that 3 year span, I went from 330 to 1,700 followers. And 5 weeks later, 6 or 5 weeks later, I'm now at 30, almost 32,000, I think, followers. And that's been really cool. I mean, to say that that hasn't felt good, I'd be lying. It really does feel good, right? To see all the hard work paying off and to be able to impact more people. Um, but I really, the best part about it is, like I said at the start, is I didn't have to change who I was in order to achieve that, right? Even if I wanted to think of different tactics to get followers or to call myself something different, meaning to play a different role or a different facade and to just go all in on one thing with different tactics to get more followers. I knew that in the end, that would not leave me happy or fulfilled. So there's been a lot of things in my past 2.5 years of my life that I've had to sacrifice. So we own a gym, and COVID was so hard. Um, Losing, going from 230 members to almost 88, being shut down completely for 7 months, not being able to use our gym, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, all these different things. And all I could think of and all I could attach myself to, not all, but mostly, is I would rather lose everything and be consistent in who I am than sacrifice anything to gain one thing. And just keep repeating that to myself over and over and over again. And then going that to that the Instagram route is just keep doing the same thing. If it resonates with someone, it'll resonate with someone. And obviously it resonated with the algorithm, which now enables me to impact more people, which I'm really, really grateful for. It's been cool to experience.
I think it's super interesting, and again, it kind of ties back to the question that you ask your clients. Why are you pursuing this thing? And I think you had the right answer. You were doing it because you wanted to overcome that fear, to build in that daily practice, and of course, you had that little following of people, maybe the clients you have on there, as a lot of people do. But I suppose that means that when one reel blew up to however many, like 3 million plus views and 70,000 likes, because it's one of those things, someone literally having a hammer and smashing into ice and then getting in it. That's obviously what made me click on it and go like, who is this crazy person? And then
Right.
you get sucked in, and then you go, actually, there's a lot of wisdom here, there's a lot
Mhm.
of really good advice and knowledge. And on top of that, I think what people then connect with and why people follow, because a lot of the time something will go viral, but no one really pays attention. They might see it and go, ha, share it to their friends, and then leave. But I
Right.
think why you've grown the following is because people have seen that you've been posting for ages. People have seen that you've been being diligent, putting in hard work, and that you're not pretending to be anyone that you're not, because they see that you just literally sat there with that. Is it a hot cup of water? It's not even a coffee or
Yeah,
anything.
I don't even drink it. It's just more for the vibe, quote unquote vibe.
Yeah, it's quite funny, especially when it's cold and it kind of turns
Yeah.
into steam. But it was interesting to see that, and almost like the psychology again of kind of people connecting with people, people recognizing that you are an authentic person. You're not trying to fake it, and I think that is such a distinct. It's a trait that's distinct from a lot of people you see online, where they are pursuing the next viral video, where they're buying followers, where they're trying to manipulate themselves to fit to the algorithm. Whereas, I mean, you kind of admitted it was kind of, even though you were posting, is kind of an accident that it just suddenly blew up, I suppose.
Mhm.
One of the things that you share is earning your dopamine, and I suppose in a roundabout way, we've talked about that kind of thing, but because it's quite a pivotal thing to what you share, I'm sure people will be interested to hear. So, what do you mean when you literally say earn your dopamine?
Yeah, yeah, it kind of fits on this comfort crisis thing, meaning dopamine is so accessible to us, whether it's on our phone, whether it's with junk food, whether it's, I think, even gossip and negativity, right? All these different things that give us this instant hit of dopamine, but cause a crash directly after, which has us continuing to come back to that thing over and over and over and over again, and we get stuck. And when I say earn your dopamine, it means pursue things that there's a resistance to gaining that dopamine. So that could be a deep, meaningful conversation, right? I feel like, and I'm sure the science probably backs it up, is you probably get a dopamine rush from having conversations like this, right? Not even a rush, but a sustained dopamine response because
Oh,
it's fulfilling.
I need to go for a walk every time I finish recording a podcast because I'm like, oh my goodness, like it's just I've absorbed so much information. And obviously the high of being on live recording, it's all just absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing with working out. Even though that can become addiction, like everything can become addiction, but it's a lot harder with things that have this resistance in front of it. It's a lot harder to fall prisoner to these things when there's a resistance in front. And even doing projects, right? And that's, I think, I heard somewhere that when you go through TikTok or Instagram, that's what's happening is like you're finishing a project. And that's why you get that dopamine response. Like you're start to finish and it's so short, right? So you're getting that hit over and over and over again. And when you do a project, you work on a project with someone, you serve someone, there's this kickback of dopamine, but you had to earn it, right? You had to go out of your way, and it doesn't leave you feeling like when people know when you scroll social media or when you eat so much junk food, you just feel gross after, right? You just feel, ugh, and you get in this downward spiral. So when you earn your dopamine, you feel better. for the rest of your day, and it actually amplifies your life and amplifies your life and makes you a better person for the people around you. And I think your habits and your deposits should amplify who you are, not detract from who you are or from the people around you.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, really trying to take a moment to trying to take that in there. We've mentioned it before, but how would you like recommend listeners to pursue that kind of voluntary pursuit of discomfort? Because I appreciate cold water plunging as much as it is the enticing thing isn't necessarily for everyone, or maybe some
Right.
people aren't able to do
Yeah.
so for whatever reason. So, how would people take steps to earn their dopamine in a similar regard?
Yeah. So I've been a part of CrossFit, and I was taught seminars with CrossFit as well for 4 or 5 years. And we talked about threshold training. And basically, what threshold training is you're creating a similar stimulus for people across a spectrum of activity level. Meaning, if I go into the gym, I'm gonna go do a workout after this podcast. I'm gonna go do a workout. I've been doing CrossFit for 12 years, 13 or 12 years, and I'm going to be doing probably the higher end of the workout because I've been doing it for so long. And I'm going to be pretty tired. I'm going to get a great deposit in. But there's going to be someone in class with me who's been doing it for maybe 2 weeks. And they're going to do a different workout, but it's going to look similar, right? The movements might be less, the intensity might be less, but they're going to get the same response. That threshold, they're still pushing that threshold, right? So they're creating a threshold that they get the response. So when people watch me hop into the ice tub, that's years and years of practice of earning that dopamine in that way. Someone else, maybe you just start with a cold shower. And if even that's out of reach, it doesn't even have to be cold. Maybe you just go for a walk as a way to exercise. So start thinking of these different deposits that meet you where you're at so you don't have this huge gap and then become disappointed when you don't meet that expectation, right? Because a lot of time disappointment is the distance between our expectation and reality. So if you move that back and actually create a lower fence for yourself and just become consistent and build momentum with the small things, give yourself a year, give yourself 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you'll be a totally different person. So just commit to doing one thing that gets you outside of your comfort zone each and every day. And that might be exercise, that might be cold exposure, that might be public speaking, that might be sharing a post, a thought you had, that might be starting a blog, starting a business. It might be one of these things, but just get outside of that comfort zone.
It's very much echoing the words I heard from Chris Williamson. He did a recent podcast with David Goggins, and he mentioned somewhere there about that gap between where we're at currently and where we'd like to be, and how because of the prevalence of social media and these role models, which can be great if used appropriately. Someone like a Goggins use them as inspiring, but if you
Right.
see them and try and emulate them and look at how far away you are from them, it can be disheartening and can
Yeah.
lead you to not even take action at all because you think, oh, what's the point? I'm so far away from it. But I suppose that really is what you're speaking to there is just comparing yourself with who you are today,
Yep.
or yesterday or tomorrow, not who someone else is. Um, and actually, speaking about that, I'll very briefly mention I actually weekly I'm trying to start going sea dipping. I'm very fortunate enough
Awesome.
to live on the south coast of England, about a 10-minute walk away from the sea. It's been something I've been doing for a couple of years, but kind of intermittently with a friend as we've kept up. Now we've gone our separate ways post school or whatever. And one of the things logistically I'm finding challenge with is I might be able to go in my body, but the extremities, particularly my feet, are absolutely like I feel like my feet are going to fall off.
Yeah.
Especially when you then come out the other side, and I mean it must be so much worse in Canada. I've seen videos for yourself where it's like minus 20 Celsius or even more than that. It's the air that hits it that makes it so much worse. So purely from a logistical perspective, if for my own benefit and the listeners, how do you kind of navigate that? I mean, I don't see you wearing any sort of like winter boots or anything that I see swimmers use, but yeah, how have you dealt with
So
that?
I sometimes wear gloves, and people ask questions why I do that. So some of my videos, I'm cold plunging in -40 Celsius with wind chill, which -36. I mean, as soon as you reach that -36, 38 to 40 mark, it's just cold, right? It's it's just cold. But I wear gloves because if I put my hands in the water and I try to grab any kind of metal, they freeze to it. So that's why, in case people were wondering. Um, and but with my feet and my hands, they were uncomfortable for a long time, and they still are semi uncomfortable. But I think my circulation system has gotten better. It does ache for a while. It does feel uncomfortable. And years prior, I actually had these neoprene boots on. But this year, I committed to starting fresh, meaning starting with less time with just my feet, so I could build that tolerance up. Because I think I had some cold. Um, Froze my feet a couple times, not like frostbite or anything, doing construction work. So it took me a little while.
I suppose it's important as well then for people to recognize when they are looking at your videos that that is the result of, as you say, 6 years of doing it. I mean, as much as it's inspiring and potentially encouraging myself and others to look more into it, it's doing that knowing that it's gradual exposure.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
go from 0 to 100 and suddenly going into a freezing cold ice bath because there are obviously also risks to getting hypothermia and things, and it's actually something that's been. It was in the UK news. It's not something you'd probably be remotely aware of, but a couple of children very very sadly passed away after falling into an ice lake when it was we had like a really cold patch, and I say really cold patch, it's -2 in the UK. That's probably average Canadian temperature. Um, but they very sadly fell in, and then there's all this discussion about the ice baths and whether it's promoting it and safe and stuff. So I think it's important for us to recognize that firstly, if you're not intending to do it, then obviously you're not going to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
Therefore, your body's going to go into that shock. And secondly, someone like yourself and someone who has done it for a while has literally conditioned their physiology
Yes.
to better deal with it.
Yeah.
And so I said we were going to mention it. I guess the question then is, what are the physiological benefits and how they play a role in how you feel?
Yeah. So I always like to preface it, and I'm saying it more on my Instagram channel too, is I'm not a physician. I am simply sharing my story, and people should try this at their own risk and check with their physician if they're nervous of doing it. I don't want to promote anything that will get someone in trouble. But yeah, so what I know and some of the studies I've read and listened to Huberman, he's talked about this, is dopamine response, serotonin increase, brown adipose tissue or brown fat. You develop more of that, which helps you increase your metabolism, which also keeps you warmer. Um, so, like I said, increased fat loss, mental clarity, um, better immunity. Like I've been sick once in the past 2 years, and that once was with Delta, and I got over it in probably 3 or 4 days. Um, and yeah, there's lots circulation, mood enhancer. I said clarity already, and there's so many benefits that yeah, it's really good. But with anything, like nothing is 100% safe, right? So and there's always a risk to everything. So just balance out the risks and the rewards for yourself before you try it.
One of the things that a previous guest, Dr. Greg Schwartz, shared, he's an environmental consultant. He said that most people are too sensible. Most people are too much, obviously, as we've discussed, in their comfort zone, but then
Yeah.
also being sensible and having too much risk aversion. And I suppose
Yeah.
doing something like sea dipping or cold water exposure, ice baths, they all sort of push that tolerance of risk and tolerance of stress And then
Yeah.
when stressful and risky times do come, they are better mentally and physically prepared for it. Are there any
That's gotta be the
times?
biggest benefit.
Sorry.
That's gotta be the biggest benefit for sure. I've noticed. Thanks for mentioning that.
I was going to ask a question directly off of the back of that, which is that has there been any clear times in your own life since you've been doing the ice baths and plunging where you can kind of attribute it your response being calmer or having an appreciation for that, you can attribute it back to that daily practice.
Yeah. I would say my faith has a large part to play in this too, but I think this practice has definitely helped. So, like I said, the pandemic was not easy on gyms, and I had the ability to disconnect myself from my emotional response and from what made sense. I just did a post on this today is you can if you can create distance between your reaction to external stress, meaning there's an external stressor placed on you and you practice that, you put yourself in an arena to practice that, meaning like a cold plunge. If you can distance yourself from that and create a calmer response, it's going to definitely benefit you in all areas of life. So, an example, your brain and body, there's like a disconnect between your brain and body, meaning there's an automatic response from your autonomic nervous system, I believe, autonomic nervous system that happens um, in stressful situations. And your body doesn't really know what's going on, but your brain does. So you can intercept that or intercede that with your breath. So then when I sometimes close my eyes, you can see that, right? You're creating this gap between your body and your brain. And that tells your body to calm down. And same thing during the pandemic, I would tell myself, okay, this is a stressful situation. This is a hard decision, but I'm going to create distance, like physical distance and mental distance from this situation for some time, whether it's someone who's emotionally driven, who's really upset at me, or whether it's a decision we have to make. I'm going to create distance because I know what usually happens is we make really poor decisions when they're emotionally driven. So that's how it's really benefited me is seeing that truth is create that discipline and distance between the stressor and your response, and the outcome will have be a lot different because it's not usually the circumstances that dictate the outcome, it's our response to those circumstances that will.
I think it's crazy that we can use our literal thought patterns and our mindset and our perspective to have a physiological response.
Mhm.
Even though, I'm sure neuroscientists out there will be like, yeah, that's obvious, blah blah blah. Talk
Right.
about all these links between the nerve endings, but I think just thinking about it intuitively is kind of a mind blowing kind of thought because it's like you can literally will yourself to be anxious over things that you shouldn't based on the way that you view things, or you can will yourself to not be. And I think
Yeah.
creating that separation was demonstrated quite clearly. I think you did a post was a couple of days ago when we're recording this, which was essentially bringing your heart rate down with Whoop, and I found that really interesting because it basically halved or less than halved, right? You're
Yeah, it
just
went from 121 to 51 in, I think it was 40 seconds or something.
which is which is nuts, but but it shows that you can if you can silence like the external stimuli, then your body can relax. And
Mhm.
part of me questions whether whether you can do that too much and artificially lull your body into comfort when
Mm.
there's a reason why your body is telling you that the ice is cold is because it's realizing
Right.
it as a risk.
Yep.
Um, so I guess there's all sort of like nuance to this, but I suppose it's definitely worth finding that balance and trying to operate from a position of okay, this is happening. Let me assess. I mean, as you were a child, kind of links all the way back now. You're able to be quiet and observe and recognize things and make sense of them before engaging too much and being in the storm, which I think is
Right.
a super interesting thing to pick up on. And so you're doing this ice plunging now. You're still doing it. Uh, of course, you've gained this following. Are there any things that have surprised you about you got like many messages like like myself reaching out for a podcast, or people asking for your coaching advice? What's that side of things been like?
Overwhelming, in a good way. I probably get 20 plus messages on Instagram a day. Um,
Wow.
and I think the one of the posts has 1,000 comments. Some of those are mine for sure. Cause I'm trying to respond. I don't know if this is wise or not. I'm trying to respond to every single person. Even the people who, that's the one thing I've really noticed. One of the few things is that there's some not super nice people out there that just like
Mm.
to stir things up, right? But I try to respond to them um, if it's not too far out there. But yeah, it's taken a lot of time and energy, but I'm grateful for it, right? And I'm grateful for the impact. So I'm trying to respond to everyone. So there's over the past 5 weeks, I've probably commented over 3,000 times, I'm sure. And what that would be hundreds of messages. And it's putting eyes on my coaching program, which I'm really grateful for because I really am passionate about helping people become resilient, disciplined, and consistent leaders in all the areas of their life. So yeah, it's been a pretty acute change up 180 degree turn for me, but I enjoy new things. I enjoy systemizing things. So it's a good opportunity for me to practice that.
There's two things I want to kind of pick up from that. But for the first one is a little bit on a sidetrack, but it's when you mentioned there kind of the unfavorable comments you might have had and people that kind of not so positive. It's something that, and again, I've not experienced this too much, but as I've put myself out there in recent years for various reasons and things and projects, you do get that backlash. And one of the things actually, ironically, relates to this whole space of cold water exposure. I saw some people saying that people that take cold baths and cold showers they just think that they're better than everyone else, and I always wonder, you can't take that comment on face value. As you've said, you have to understand why that person is commenting that, and be observant and recognize that maybe that's coming from a place of insecurity, of jealousy that they can't also do that. And I think it's hard, obviously, and I hope that you don't experience too much of that. I'm sure you haven't. I'm sure it's very very minimal. Um,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things. It's just I thought it'd be worth just to touch on because it is something that we've got to recognize. You know what? Like none of us are perfect. We're all just
No.
trying to do things that are more in the direction of just delaying that gratification, banking those deposits daily. And I think, yeah, I just thought it'd be worth mentioning. Um, the second thing is, uh, do you see any kind of negatives? Like, do you see that you've got to be careful of how you take this this new direction and how you're going to steward this new following? I don't mean negative. I don't mean to put like a downer on it, but
No,
just to
no, that's a
consider.
good question. I had a Phil Chan, he's the author of spiritual shoot, I forget it. It's a resilient something. Spiritual resilience. It's a great book. I'll make sure to mention it after, but he asked me the same question on my podcast is how are you going to handle this? How is this going to affect you? And I think so I always told Jaleesa, like I've always prayed that I would know who I am with or without. And because that's one of the most scary things, especially when you observe people, and I'm an observer, is them getting captivated by money, fame, success, whatever else it might be, and then losing themselves in the process. And so I purposely surround myself. My wife would be one. I want her to keep me accountable. I have multiple Bible study groups. I have mentors. I have coaches, people that know me, who I am now, that I entrust them to be honest with me and to keep me on the same trajectory I am on right now. Because I know regardless of how many followers or how much influence you have, there's always gonna be those temptations, right, to go against your values or what you believe in. But I feel pretty confident because we went through some pretty hard stuff in the pandemic, and we more or less were willing to lose what we created over the last 10 years in order to live into what we believed was the right thing to do. So that sucked, but it also gave me a lot of confidence and courage that, yep, I stood that test. I think I can stand other ones. But not to say that I still won't surround myself with people who can keep me accountable.
I think it's so important to keep to keep that grounding, not only in the people around you, but also in your faith, as you've mentioned, and just hopefully that does really serve you well, and does bring a nice closed knit community of people who are being exposed to what I believe to be genuinely great message. And from this 70-80 minute conversation, I've really recognized that you are exactly who you purport to be on the social media, and you are really someone that I'd very happily recommend to anyone, because it's clear that you're living in alignment. You're very grounded, and I think what you have to say is very insightful and very valuable for people's lives. What does the future hold? Do you think? I mean, I know it's hard to tell. Just come into the new year as of recording, and obviously you've got this newfound Instagram fame.
Yeah.
But where do you hope to take where do you hope to take the platform? And personally, have you got any particular ambitions coming up?
Yeah. So again, from the pandemic, I've shifted my mindset in how I plan things. I'm going to plan things as best I possibly can. I want to get more short term rentals as a way to give space for people to retreat and find some space and peace from chaos in life. We're currently partnered up on one with a great couple in Nelson, BC. It's a big ski lodge. So we want to do more of those. Um, Continue to coach people, continue to try to steward my family or Jaleesa as best I can and be a good leader there. And then the rest, just do the daily things that I think are going to lead in a certain direction. The one big thing that I'm continuing working towards, and this has been on my mind for 4 years, I want to buy a piece of land in around the mountains, the Canadian Rockies. I'm going to create a retreat center where there can be corporate retreats, there can be church retreats, there can be space where people can rent spots. There'll be a sauna, there'll be an ice tub, there'll be a gym, there'll be all these different things that give an acute retreat for people to disconnect from the chaos of modern day life and help them reframe and change the trajectory of where their life is going. Because I think you can have these experiences, whether it's listening to a podcast or maybe it's a post or whether it's a habit or a retreat that can absolutely transform your life. So that's the big one I'm continually working towards. And if anyone's interested in being part of that, reach out to me.
If I was in Canada, I would definitely get involved. But
Sounds
uh,
good.
yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that my message could have easily got lost in amongst the floods of DMs you've been receiving, in the wake of going. I guess you'd call it viral. If people can find you from my audience and people who maybe have come across this podcast having not followed you, how can people get in touch and how can people follow you?
Yeah, so Instagram at Matt Chenard. Send me a message. I'll try to get to it as quickly as I possibly can. You can also there's links in my bio that have it has a free ebook on the Anchor method now. It has newsletter sign up and discount codes, all those wonderful things, right? So feel free to check that out. That's the best. Instagram's gonna be the best way because that's where I'm on the most right now.
I love the free book. I think there's a quote I read. I don't know if you follow the Dan Coe.
Danco.
If not, I'd recommend.
Yeah.
He's recently blown up as well. He had like 150, 200, which I know is a lot, but he's gone to 1 million in like a month. It's crazy.
Oh,
Just from like some viral reels. But I think um oh no, I've mentioned him and now I've forgotten the thing that I was going to say.
like an
That
ebook or something.
yes, one of the things he shares is like make your free content better than other people's paid content. And I think, I mean, obviously I haven't read it, but I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is very, very good.
Well,
So,
here's hoping.
I'll be sure to check it out after this. And yeah,
Sounds good.
I wish you all the success. Thank you very much for everyone for listening. And yeah, I'll obviously link your channels in the description.
Perfect. Thanks, Zach.